Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Well, thank you to the Teen Eagles for having me today, and thank you for being here today. We have had an exciting week, right, so far? And I think I can safely say I speak for all of us when I say that the most exciting thing is that Liz Cheney is not our Secretary of Defense starting in January. So I'm personally excited about that one because that's a name I'm happy to see go away to the ash heap of political history. So we don't talk about them anymore. But we're in a wild ride right now. By the way, anyone who is asking, I heard the whispers in the back. No, we do not officially have the House yet, although I believe it's coming. The Republicans are up to 213. There's 7 or 6 more that are leaning Republican right now. But actively, we're watching them try to snitch districts away. And that's because we haven't fixed all the problems from 2020. But for anyone looking at the vote totals, we have definitely fixed a major problem. Either that or 13 million Democrats disappeared from 4 years ago to now. So my favorite thing coming out of this week, obviously, is Donald Trump. My second favorite thing is J.D. Vance in 2028, which I am exceedingly excited about the more I get to hear from him and get to know him. And the third thing that I'm most excited about is looking at this and saying, for all of the last 4 years, for a lot of us who pointed and said there are problems with this is an issue. This map doesn't make sense. There was obviously fraud. We were not allowed to litigate it. We never got it in front of a court. If anyone tells you that courts rejected it or ruled on it, they didn't rule on it. They rejected it at every single point, including all the way up to the Supreme Court. They just didn't take up election cases in 2020 because no one wanted that responsibility, quite frankly. There would be riots in the streets, which, mark my words, will begin shortly. They haven't begun yet, and everyone's playing nice, but that will only go for so long. So as far as that goes, today what I want to do is I want to run through a few things and talk about some of the major things that we saw this week. I'd like to give you a little bit of insight. I will try to not go super deep in the numbers unless someone specifically asks, because that's where I go. I tend to just run off, and I'm talking about very odd counties in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wisconsin. So we'll try to keep it to broader level stuff. But I also would like to talk about a few very specific things here in Missouri. I want to talk about some of the cultural implications, and then I'd like to forecast this out all the way, if you don't mind, to 2032. When we have some very interesting stuff, I think, that's going to happen. Because we saw a huge, big wave. Let me tell you what, though, right off the front of it. In fact, let me bring this over here. I've got I won't run all of the everythings, but I'll just at least have something up behind me. So as I look at the election results this week, aside from, like I said, the obvious question that I have, where are about 13.3 million votes right now that aren't there? That graph, if you've seen that scooting around the internet, where it shows the vote totals for 2012, 2016, 2020, and then 2024, makes absolutely no sense. That right there explains to anyone who called you an election denier or just said, I don't know if I quite believe you. That right there is the perfect picture I've put in front of several people who are Trump folks, but said, I think the election stolen stuff was a little overdone. I've sent them that graph. I've said, now we've got the next set of data. And everyone has responded, okay, that looks a little weird. I know, we told you it looked a little weird, but now we have the next set of data. So one of the interesting things that I look at across this map is what I'm going to call an issue of political split ticketing. Because you may or may not have seen it here in Missouri. I saw a lot of red MAGA cap wearing people walk into the polling place and proudly check all the Republican candidates and vote yes on Amendment 3. And it was not because they didn't understand what Amendment 3 did. It is because they boilerplated it down to, well, I'm fine with choice. We have a cultural disparity. We have lost people on that issue. And the left is successfully making everything about abortion. We do not win on that anymore. I think that we can again, but I think we have a lot of education to make up. So I'm going to first look at this and say, this is not a red wave. We did not experience a Republican Party anything. What we experienced is the knowledge now, looking at this map, that Donald Trump is the most popular political figure in America, and that has nothing to do with the Republican Party. But what this does have to do with is Donald Trump's extreme coattails pulling people across the finish line. This is why you see when we flip over to the Senate map, First of all, I will be the first to tell you that these two states up here, Michigan and Wisconsin, absolutely should have a Republican senator. However, those Republican senators running, as good as Eric Hovda and as good as Mike Rogers are, they are not Donald Trump. They do not carry the same cross-ticket appeal because it's just not there. And same with Nevada. I would love to say that they stole it from Sam Brown, but the more I look at the numbers, I think that actually we just don't have Nevada, even though Trump does. So there's an interesting disparity to look at when I see this, because this tells me, as much as I am celebrating right now, we could pick this apart and talk about a lot of the results and returns and where they are, but this can't be replicated in 2022. Even if Trump goes out and stumps for folks, we cannot replicate this same red wave map from the presidential level in 2022 because Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot. And then it makes me wonder, can we replicate it in 2028? Because again, Donald Trump will not be on the ballot. We have a severe cultural deficit to make up to figure out how to get the America First Trump folks to understand that other people can be trusted. But on the other side of that, let me say, we have a long way to go to get pretty much almost any other Republicans to the same level of trustworthiness that people have with Donald Trump. That's part of a celebrity factor I don't know how we make up, to be quite honest, because everyone knows everything about Trump. And this is, look at what they've done to him the last 4 years. There is no end to the amount of lawfare and vitriol and hateful things that they've said about him, and yet it never moved the needle for people because everyone already knew this much about Donald Trump. So when they learned something new and nasty, it took up this much of that space. But even for someone like Kamala Harris, they knew this much about her, so when something new came up, it took up a much bigger chunk of space in their brains. It would affect their decision-making on her. It didn't do that to Trump. It never has. So anyone new, including J.D. Vance, or whoever the next standard bearer is, that person is going to be at a supreme disadvantage because anything that is learned about him by public knowledge will take up a much bigger percentage of their perception of him than it will about Trump, who everyone has known for decades. So we really do have an interesting situation on our hands because there is a split ticket problem. People do not necessarily agree with us on a lot of the issues. Now that said, one of the big victories we did see, which I'll get to in a minute, I'd like to talk about some of the presidential numbers, but one of the big things that we did have victory on was election integrity measures. There were a lot of ballot issues across the country, and I'm disappointed that only 2 of the 10 pro-life, pro-abortion fights went the way that I'd like them to. However, on the front of election integrity, almost every single state that had an opportunity to ban ranked choice voting or to put in photo ID or something important, that passed or failed, whichever it was that we wanted, it went flyingly. People understand that elections need to be protected. If we can take that step, then I have a little bit more confidence. Okay, now I can talk to you about some of the cultural implications of these social issues. And when we go to the ballot box, I know that it's actually the electorate that is going to be able to make the decision. So that's at least a step. But looking back at what we had here on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, who stayed up until it was done? All right, so when did you call it as done? Is my question then next.
About 2:30.
About 2:30? I called it at 12:30, so I beat you by a touch. No, as soon as we got to a point about 10:30 to 11, we were marching through and we had all the, and my prediction the whole time was 312 votes on the map. He would take all 7 swing states. I hang my hat on the fact that I predicted that one right. And everyone's asked me about the House and Senate, and I said, I'm out. I did the one. I'm going to stop here. But as soon as we got to a point in Pennsylvania, I looked at all the numbers that were still left in Philadelphia and everywhere else in the state and said, it's about 10:30 at night. I said, there's no way. She doesn't have enough votes to make it up. So let's not celebrate too early, but I think that this is now done. Pennsylvania falls, and then there is no statistical path for her. That ended up being true.
Sleep, though, because if you wake up the next morning, it could have totally changed.
Well, and my comment was, we can all go to sleep because we'll wake up tomorrow with different vote numbers, but not a different leader, at least in the presidential race. Maybe in the Senate races. And sure enough, we did. Those 2 red states aren't very red in the Senate race. So looking across some of these trends, though, it is very interesting. I'm going to suspend my discussion about voter fraud for the next little bit, and we're just going to talk about the pure numbers of trend changes we've seen. Because, again, if you look at the 2020 numbers, it doesn't quite line up, black and white, because there are so many voters just missing from those equations. That said, though, one of my favorite maps that we have been looking at. Let me see if I can pull this up and put it over here. Has anyone seen the shift map, the wave map with all the arrows on it? Has this one hit anyone yet? This map is so very exciting. You are going to make me do a free account now. Oh, the New York Times. All right, here's what we're going to do then. I'm going to just move this one over. So this map is very consequential and very important. Each one of these little dots is actually an arrow, and each one of them is a different color, blue or red. Now, does anyone see a little bit of blue up there? But it's not nearly like the red. This is the shift in every single county. Arrow is a county. Every single county represented by an arrow. The shift, how much, based on how long the arrow is, from left to right, the swing of the voters in that county from 2020 to 2024. Not just the eastern half of the country, basically from the Rocky Mountains eastward. Since the last 4 years, the country chose a vastly more Republican option this year. They swung to the right in a way that we have not seen. And if you look at the voter fraud, especially when we come down here around Texas, some of these numbers are wild. In Florida, where there are a ton of Hispanic immigrants, and in Texas, in southern Texas, where there are a ton of Hispanic immigrants. In fact, the number that I saw come through looking at polls or exit polls is that Donald Trump was backed by about 46% of Hispanic voters on Tuesday. That passes Ronald Reagan, that passes George W. Bush to win the biggest share of national Hispanic vote by any Republican ever in the history of the United States of America. Not just numbers, percentage. So there are several groups of people that are looking around, at least economically and socially, saying, I don't buy this one of the two national parties anymore. That is a huge trend in our favor, because the Hispanic population is typically far more socially minded, like a lot of the rest of the social conservatives. So if we've got a group of voters out there who I would like to bring into the fold and find them on a certain set of issues, that's one I am awfully excited about. But I mean, looking at that, there were 2 states in the nation, 48 of the 50 states technically moved to the right from their votes in 2020. Even the states that Kamala Harris won, or quote unquote won, whichever you'd like to say. I'm happy to give them to her this year because we outright won. Out of every single state in the nation, only 2 of them actually voted to the left of 4 years ago. Even the blue states moved a little to the right. Some other fun things I noticed. Wisconsin had a very interesting shift out in the rural counties, which are now overpowering the blue states, or the blue cities. That's an effect that we appreciate here in Missouri, isn't it? Being able to say it doesn't matter if you're really popular in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Columbia, we can still take you down by 10 percentage points. That's starting to look like it might be a possibility in Wisconsin moving forward. Minnesota, your tidbit for the evening, it's maybe not super consequential, but Minnesota has turned essentially red, except for the couple of big cities. And Tim Walz's home county actually voted for Trump overwhelmingly this year. So that was a fun one. But then looking at it, every single shift that I looked at nationwide, and here I kind of want to ramrod through the numbers because I want to spend a couple more minutes and then go to questions and answers on some bigger topics. But across the country, urban counties voted 5.2% toward Trump. Suburban counties, 4.3% toward Trump. Counties that are over 25% black voters, 4.1% toward Trump. Counties over 25% Hispanic, 9.5% for Trump. Counties less than 50% white, 6.9% for Trump. And one of the fun ones, because the left on TikTok likes to constantly tell us it's only the smart people who are voting for Kamala Harris, over 50% college-educated counties voted 4.0% for Trump. Every single metric shifted our direction. It's really wild. By the way, you want to notice why we shouldn't have D.C. as a state. If you needed to know anything about that, statehood for the District of Columbia, there are your election returns for the District of Columbia, 92.59% for Kamala Harris. So let's remember, D.C. statehood needs to be of the lowest possible priorities to pass and the highest to kill as a possibility. But looking across Tuesday, this really is interesting. And again, it brings me back to the overarching point that I started with. We're in Trump world. This was good for Trump. This is not necessarily inherently good for the Republican Party. But looking across the board in how this moves, we can see where people are looking at. I saw this too. And just again, I'm sorry. My brain has been rattling around all of the details, and I'm trying to pull out specific ones for people that didn't get reported unless you were deep into the weeds. But in Texas, over 1/3 of black men voted for Donald Trump. More than doubled his support since 2020. Across the board in other places, the big one that the liberal internet would like you not to believe, white women voted 53% for Donald Trump. The one category that we were told hates and would never put the bad orange man back in office, by a majority, voted across the country to install Donald Trump. 60% of men, which, by the way, the engagement of men, typically you see about 37% of the voting, 35 to 40% of the voting populace women, and much lower men. This year, men almost rivaled women voting in the election. We had huge engagement of young men, and I think that's a cultural implication of what the left has done to men in America, to men across the first world, really. There's a reaction, and we're just seeing the start of it. But again, the question is, after all these numbers, what can we do about it to seize on it? Looking across some of the other polls, I noticed a fun things this year. Donald Trump was closer to winning New York than Kamala Harris was to winning Florida, which was a swing state 3 cycles ago. And of course, even then, Kamala Harris's lead in New York got cut down to 12 points when Biden won the state by 27. There are shifts across the country that I look at and say we have to figure out how to take advantage of this, because whether they're exhausted with the left's policies, whether they'll admit it or not, or if they're excited about new populist protectionist policies that put the United States of America first, there is a great amount of openness that we need to be ready to take. So, I could go on and on and on about some massive shifts. Here's some fun ones. Michigan, by the way, I was looking at the numbers in Michigan. Orthodox Jewish precincts in the heart of Michigan suburbs swung 20% towards Trump. And because of the left's absolutely insane policies supporting terrorist organizations abroad, the Arab and Bangladesh precincts in big suburban areas of Michigan swung 70% toward Trump because they are so unhappy with the radical left. It's very interesting to see a lot of stuff going on. They can't make anyone happy. So the trends this year are kind of wild. I don't know if we'll ever replicate what we're looking at. But it was a wild night, and I don't know, like I said, if we'll ever quite see these things again. Now, Missouri. Let me say, I am very hopeful for a lot of things. We passed Proposition A, the minimum wage raise. That was not an amendment. That was just law. It will be tinkered with by our legislature. I have pretty good hopes that we will manage to minimize the economic damage that could cause. I was not surprised when voters decided to put across the top sports betting in Missouri. Very, very close. Again, we'll see what can be done out of the legislature. We did ban ranked choice voting by almost a 70% victory. That's massive. I think that was a huge win, which tells me even if people are snookered by other cultural issues or by being able to get on DraftKings and do sports betting, they are concerned about election integrity. If we can shore up election integrity and if we can clean up voter rolls, I think we have a good chance to change more of these things in the future. But when it comes to our legislature, I am very excited about the Missouri Senate. We added some very, very strong biblical conservatives who understand our values and where it comes from. And some of them were swaps, obviously outgoing, outgoing and extremely outgoing both ways. Senator Bill Eigel was termed out. He's being replaced by a young man who is, I think, very solid, Adam Schnelting. But we also picked up Brad Hudson, Joe Nicola out on the western side of the state. There are a few key leaders in the Senate that held up a lot of good conservative priorities, constitutionally focused priorities that are gone. And a few folks who've replaced them that are far more firebrand and social, religious, right conservative. I think there's a good opportunity there to even use their power to put forward new amendments to limit some of the ones that we've just passed, like Amendment 3, and put those back up to a vote of the people. And if we can attack one issue at a time, we might actually be able to go through, and not just through litigation, which there have been lawsuits. I've seen potential petitions. You just sent me one earlier, a petition against Amendment 3. A lot of groups have already filed major amendment or major lawsuits against Amendment 3. There may be movement on that because the language is vague. It doesn't say what it's going to change. It doesn't say how much it's going to cost. It meets almost no constitutional standard of what the ballot language is supposed to be. And yet, our Missouri Supreme Court, 4-3, went ahead and sent it through and let it go onto the ballot. Now, 2 of the 3 who voted against it to strike it down from the Missouri ballot just got retained to the Supreme Court. I think that might be good. I hope they continue that pattern of good decisions. But I look at it and say we have a good legislature, and I think that our great hope there is to have a legislature with a commanding conservative presence that will move forward and give us new ballot issues, the off years. For heaven's sake, please don't give us any more ballot issues on presidential election years. I like the informed voting. In fact, if we could do them in August on the primaries, I think that would be even better. Yes, sir.
Quick question. So the amendment would never have gone forward if we had IP reform. That was done by the Senate, correct?
Well,
I mean, that was destroyed by the Senate, by Mary Elizabeth Cohen, right?
yes, it officially died in the Senate. It was a struggle through the House, but it officially died in the Senate.
So what's the chances of getting IP reform through this next year?
Higher, much higher. And my question mark there is not that the legislature won't do it. My question mark is, will the executive agents help bully it through?
Right.
Which they haven't done.
Right.
I don't trust that Mike Kehoe will be any better than Mike Parson on that. However, I do trust that Mike Kehoe just had a lot more pressure than Mike Parsons ever had to get in. So I think, will he be a little more susceptible to right-wing control? Yes. And I mean all that in the best possible way. I think that he will be much more influenceable toward the conservative position, and I think that our legislature has a few less establishment folks in the Jeff City swamp, and a few more real right-wingers that actually believe the issues and will push forward pro-Constitution stuff despite it.
I'm concerned about that, quite frankly, is not we could have stopped Amendment 3, but we have to stop the gun amendment that's going to come out. There's going to be amendments coming for our guns.
Yeah, there's quite a few. And I'm trying to find this now. I was looking at it, and it disappeared on me. I was looking at the map, though, and based on how the votes cast for Amendment 3, county by county in Missouri, if the initiative petition process reform that we wanted would have passed the legislature last year or any year prior, Amendment 3 would have failed, which is what we saw in Florida. You pull this up. Let me grab my big, long ballot measures here. We'll go to this nationally real quick. But no, I can shut that down. But if you come over to the ballot issues nationwide, abortion here in Florida, their quote-unquote reproductive right, the constitutional right to abortion, passed by 57%, but they have a 60% threshold. That's the kind of stuff we want here in Missouri. Whether it's a 60% threshold or whether you have to have not just a majority of votes, but also a majority of each congressional district, which I think is pretty similar to what the specific petition reform was last year. Looking across our map, it would have failed miserably. We wouldn't have Amendment 3, except it was just a pure vote, 50% plus one, which drastically needs to be changed. But again, I look down here. There were some good ones. There were some bad ones. Colorado passed an abortion amendment. Arizona did as well. Florida obviously shot it down. Maryland passed it. Missouri passed it. Montana passed it. Nebraska passed a reinforcement of their ban on abortions after 12 weeks, which I'll take as a victory for now. It's not total, but I'll take it. Nevada passed an abortion rights bill. New York did. South Dakota rejected it. When we get down to elections and voting, this is where I just mentioned I'm excited. Because looking at all the presidential, I could pick it apart this way and that. We have good shifts in the country. But if we cannot seize on them in the future, both culturally to keep winning those votes and in a way to secure them in the election process, we're not going to hit them in the future. Yes, ma'am.
What were the states that passed this? You said it so fast.
That passed the abortion bills?
Yeah.
I can send that to you afterward. I know we've only got a little bit of time here, but
What was the percentage in Missouri that you passed it?
Missouri went over 52. I think it went over 52 to 47, 52 and change to 47 and change.
Any numbers on how the Christian community
But-
voted or didn't vote on that?
I don't know the breakdown demographically on that one as far as Missouri specifically. Amendment 2 was very fuzzy. It was even closer. 50.07 to 49.92. It was, oh wait, that's Amendment 2. Amendment 3, I was right, 51.6 to 48.3. It was still very close. Apparently only 5,000 more people liked sports betting. I like how close that one was. I wish it were close the other direction. I don't think Amendment 3 is close enough for a recount, though. We may see that on Amendment 2 on the sports betting initiative, which would be nice, a recount level, but I don't expect to see it on Amendment 3. But looking down the rest of everything, on elections and voting, Alaska is poised. It is pulling away even farther, 51 to 49%. We're now a full 2 points off. They are going to repeal their ranked choice voting system, which was put in place very specifically by Lisa Murkowski to ensure her reelection. Let's be abundantly clear. That was the perfect picture for anyone who didn't understand ranked choice voting conceptually. That was the perfect picture, I think, because they saw the machine put it in place to make sure they could hedge their bets and stay in power. But Arizona eliminated a ranked choice voting amendment. They shot it down. Colorado is currently shooting down a ranked choice voting initiative. They can't get hardly anything right, but they got ranked choice voting right. I guess I'll take it. Of course, Connecticut passed a ranked choice voting. The District of Columbia passed a ranked choice voting. I don't know why, since they have unanimous consent there with 92% voting for Kamala Harris. Iowa upheld a citizenship requirement, which of course we did here in Missouri. That was tied in with our ranked choice voting. Everywhere that a citizen requirement, Idaho, everywhere that was up, it passed. Idaho also shot down ranked choice voting. Kentucky upheld a new citizenship requirement language. Missouri did as well. North Carolina did as well. Nevada shot down ranked choice voting. And they increased photo ID requirements. Oklahoma, same thing, citizenship requirement to vote. This issue is a winner. People don't trust the election system. They want it secured. How do we make sure it's only citizens? How do we make sure we don't move to a system of automatic runoff or instant runoff, which is what they try to mask ranked choice as all the time? Looking at those numbers, I am encouraged that this is a very good winning thing to lean into. And cleaning up the voter rolls is another one that seems to continue to be one of the major things people appreciate and go for. Yeah, sure, we need to clean up the voting rolls. Why should there be dead people, moved people, fill in the blank people? And looking across all of that, I see if we're going to secure future elections, we have a few key areas. Where did my cursor go? Here you are. We have a few key areas that look like they are winners right now. People understand them and they're with us. If we can lean into those and get them done, that is one more chink in all of the things that need to be handled in the future. But back to Missouri, I am disappointed by Amendment 3, but I am encouraged at a very positive movement in the legislature. So I think that the fight is not over on that issue, even if we lost Amendment 3. It's time for taking a knee and rest, taking two knees in prayer and regrouping, because I think we do have a legislature that will very capably help us move forward on that issue. I know for several of them I've talked to, it is a priority. Okay, what can we do now on Amendment 3? Because we get to suggest new amendments and put it on the ballot. And we also have to pass initiative petition reform. So looking at that, I'm very excited and encouraged about the future possibilities. And we could go through left and right a few different things, but let me put one more thing in front of you. I don't know if this was on your radar, but there were problems with the 2020 census. I know government ran something and there was a problem with it. This is a very surprising thing for some of you. I'm kidding, that was sarcasm. Government ruins most of what it touches anymore at the federal level. But as I looked down the map of a few different things, we have another census coming up in 2030. Now, we could have argued this year over the fact that Florida got jilted. They should have actually had 2 more electoral votes and they would have moved from somewhere else. But there are a few very fun things to look at. With the census coming in 2030, by every number that we know, By the way, another fun one looking forward, 2026, our next midterm, almost every single Senate seat that's up does not have a chance of flipping either way. It will, I do not believe, affect the Senate at all. I could be mistaken, but we'll see how in 2 years that looks. But looking forward to 2032, if we can survive 2028, this is very interesting. We're going to see if the numbers hold where they are now, thanks to our 2030 census, we ought to see Florida and Texas gaining 4 electoral votes each. We will see Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina gaining 1. New York is going to lose 3. Pennsylvania is going to lose 1. Illinois loses 2. That's a personal yay for me. Anything Illinois can lose. But the state, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Oregon, California is set to lose 5, and they've moved over to Utah, Arizona, Idaho. Yes, this means liberal voters, blue state voters, are fleeing to somewhere they don't get taxed as badly or crushed under all of the nasty stuff. And no, they don't understand where it came from, and they still vote the same way. But at least for the next 10 to 15 years, there's a big enough majority in these states that this makes it very interesting. If you extrapolate this potential change in 2030 out the right way, what happens is 2032's presidential election looks something like this. We could lose the big blue wall all the way back to the blue, and the Republican Party will still get 281 electoral votes. The electoral map in 2032 could very much lose the Rust Belt again, but we will not lose the presidency. To me, this is very, very interesting and very big news. And also why, as much as I believe that there is no more fundamental, important thing as the right to life, I also understand that my politics has to be driven a little bit by strategy. I'll never change my convictions for strategy, but my vote and my politics have to be driven by strategy to an extent. And strategically, shoring up the elections now in places like Arizona, which is about to become a 12, Texas, which is about to become a 44, and Florida, which is about to become a 33. These things can get us to a point of potentially several cycles of dominating presidential maps, which is increasingly becoming difficult as we have a country of red states with big giant blue cities. So election integrity, I think, is incredibly important. Photo ID, cleaning up voter rolls, which that's not usually an electoral issue that we get to decide on. So that's why what I want to come is, we're all happy about Trump. Well, I hope we are. I think it's a good thing. We're all very disappointed about Amendment 3. But what I want more than anything is for us all to understand, as grassroots conservative activists, people who have our own spheres of influence, there are some things we've just lost the culture on, and frankly, we're going to have to hearts and minds win people back. Because we've arrived at a point where it's, especially on the abortion issue, I encounter people who know full well what it's all about. They just don't care. We've gone decades down a moral spiral. Just a sec. I got you, I'll remember. We've gone decades down a moral spiral after I don't even know how long. 100 plus years of indoctrination settings being put into the public education system and this and that and the other. We've really lost people morally. I believe we can get them back, but it's going to take a while. And in the meantime, there's a lot of other low-hanging fruit, especially in the election integrity world that I see. These are strategically how we can get a hold of and hold a map so that we can continue to install folks, even if they're not perfect, like President Trump, who is very far from perfect on life. I know that I've got multiple seats at that table. And for a lot of other Republicans for the last, all of my lifetime, we've gotten lip service, but pro-lifers and true religious liberty advocates and constitutionalists haven't necessarily had seats at the table, just lip service for quite a while. So there's a lot of moving parts to think about. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering how much people understand that are here about initiative petition reform. Do you all understand that? Or would it be wise to, because the reason I'm saying that is because of that, not being reformed, I guess is the best way to put it, we got that amendment on the ballot.
Right.
Money came in from other states to control our state. People came in from other states to handle petitioning outside that only got they were here because they were getting $26 an hour to be paid to stand outside our libraries. So we have to get rid of that. We have tried for 7 years minimum And there was a person that was instrumental in the legislature to destroy the efforts to end initiative petition, but it didn't work. And I know that at the Central Committee meeting next Wednesday, one of our legislators, or one of our committeemen, will be bringing forth a petition to make that person accountable.
Which county are you in? St. Louis?
St. Louis County.
Okay.
Right.
Good.
And so at the
By the way, we're talking, you're very specifically referring to Mary Elizabeth Coleman.
absolutely.
But feel free, please name.
I mean, because
Name and shame.
she needs to be held accountable.
Yeah.
And even though if you show up there next Wednesday, you don't have voting privileges if you're not elected, but you can be there in mass to show that you're not happy with this situation. And I'd like to think, I'm kind of new in this, so I'd like to think that that'll make a difference in what the direct board does when they bring this petition to the floor.
Right. Well, and
7:30.
and that's where, and the St. Louis,
It's in Gravois Bluffs, right
Yeah.
next to J.C. Penney's.
St. Louis County Republican Central Committee does have a website and a Facebook page where that information is posted. Go and find it. I mean, we can repeat, but I mean, go and find it because
It's of significance and importance.
Well, and that's the
because
thing.
We have to start at the local level.
this is where I look at and say I understand that we have our balance of issues where this is a conviction level issue I will not change, but strategically there's another issue over here, and in some cases it changes the process. I'm not going to say that initiative petition reform is more important morally than protecting innocent life. It's not. Morally, fundamentally, life is. However, next year in our session, I don't care if the pro-lifers want to cast aside every single pro-life issue if they can put 101% of their force and effort behind changing initiative petition reform. Because if we do not control the process, it doesn't matter how right you are. If the process is wide open to either fraudulent or just finagling activities, to your point, out-of-staters, $26 an hour and multiple millions of dollars dumping into the state, if we don't control the process, doesn't matter how right we are ineffective and sitting in the ditch on the side. Yes, sir.
I got a question, kind of big picture, and I still want to look back a little bit. I think this election cycle, we had Democrats' absolute two worst people, Biden and come on, I mean by far, and the Dems are even saying that now. We probably had our rock star with Trump, as you're saying, we may not be replaced. What did they do on Tuesday to stop the cheat? I mean, because something happened with those 13 million votes, which is kind of significant, especially in Pennsylvania. You said the other day you told me about lawyers. They have like 500 lawyers in Pennsylvania.
When did we talk? On Saturday?
Yeah, something like that. But
oh my gosh, Monday was so exciting.
wasn't it?
Anyway, go ahead.
The lawyers, I'm guessing, if that information is right, I'm picturing lawyers looking at someone who's holding them lock boxes, you know, until they know what they need to stuff in them, which that's quite an accusation, but that's probably true. They're holding back their votes, and at one point Minnesota actually stopped voting. I don't know if you caught that.
Yeah, they did.
Stopped, and I'm like, oh, my blood chilled when that happened. So like, all that to say, what do they do to stop the cheat? And when they bring a decent candidate, we don't have a strong candidate let's say Vance is a slightly less popular guy than Trump. What if they bring someone good? I mean, what are we going to do in the future to stop the cheat again?
Okay, that's two questions. On the first one, I have two things. By the way, let me just say on yours, leaning on the legislature is how we make initiative petition happen. I'd love to have a better governor who would lean on them, but the reality is the voting has to happen in our state legislature to make that change. Incessantly call your state representative and your state senator, annoy the crud out of them. I mean, I did just spend the last 2 weeks emailing staff of our U.S. senator 3 times a day on a schedule. And then if they ever responded, I had to make sure and go unschedule a few emails because I was emailing them and texting them 3 times a day until I got a response. And they may have hit the block on their end, I don't know, but I was annoying them. That's the level of a commitment that we have to have at our state legislators to shut it down, because we had Ben Brown and Bill Eigel and Rick Bratton and a few I can name on one hand who fought tooth and nail for initiative petition reform, but there weren't enough others. You light a fire under their rear ends, a few of them, you'll get a few more under their ranks. And we have a few more, I think, a good opportunity. That's what's required. And part of it is you have to get your central committee under them. You have to go and lean on everyone. Don't stop talking about it. Welcome to grassroots politics. That's now what it takes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. No, and you're right. Central committee is an important part of it too, because they can annoy people on your behalf. Tuesday, they stopped the cheat for two reasons. Number one, there was an army of lawyers that filed lawsuits faster than I like to admit that I enjoyed, but I enjoyed watching the lawsuits come flying. Generally, I'm not for a litigious society, but Tuesday it was a real pleasure. There was a lot of stuff that got shut down as fast as it happened. And the same thing last week in early voting. Bucks County, Pennsylvania didn't like the way that things were going, so they shut down the early voting line. That only happened one time before they got smacked with a lawsuit, and the next morning a judge said, you have to open an extra day now because you weren't allowed to do that. There was an army of Trump and RNC lawyers that effectively stopped so many things as they started or prevented them from happening to begin with. Number two, though, to your point and to what I said earlier, 13 million at this point Democrat voters simply disappeared from 4 years ago to now. I have to believe, from everything that I'm able to see, that there is simply just an effect of this year was a set of concession candidates. I think that this team was the expendables. It was not the rock stars that the Democrats had to offer. Looking at Kamala Harris, looking at how they installed her so unpopularly without a primary process, someone who didn't even make it to the one primary she ran in to receive a single losing vote, she got nothing because she dropped out in 2019 before the primaries even kicked off. I look at her and I look at Tim Walz and I say they kept their powder dry and they did not put someone in who was going to lose against the bad orange man, which will be a black mark on their political credibility moving forward. I think that they knew the Trump train was rolling hard enough that it was going to be a big battle to win. And the Trump army of lawyers was going to make that 81 million votes impossible again to a certain extent. So I think they put in the C team because we can afford to lose these people on the national scene and it's not going to hurt us later on. Which is why you didn't see a Gavin Newsom. As terrible as he is, he's very popular on their side and he has a lot of money. Or a Josh Shapiro, who's actually a credible debater and can do a decent job. You didn't see any of them. And I think it's because they knew we have a higher than normal chance of losing. Let's not waste anyone that we want in the future. I really maintain that that is part of what we saw. So they just didn't trot out the big numbers and the big guns because it would have been abundantly strange if it would have come out for Kamala Harris when no one else would, hardly. So I think that that is a factor. But the army of lawyers was very helpful. We did not have that in 2020. It was abjectly missing from the field of fight. Yes,
A
sir.
quick question. There was a lot of stuff about Turning Point USA getting out the vote in college campuses this year. I think that was part of the demographics that they've talked about. There's a very, very robust community in the college community. That's something that is, as we have youngsters here growing up, there's going to be 4 more years, 2 more years, 2 more years, 4, there's going to be more. We need to be doing that in our community, in our state, okay? The same kind of enthusiasm to change the young people, minds about what's going on here.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. And that's another factor. It is yet one more. There were so many factors this year because Turning Point USA, which they were primarily in Arizona and then on college campuses across the country. Right. If you notice, by the way, if I go down to the granular level in Pennsylvania, I can't click on this map.
I watched the interview last night on Ingram, the Angle. They interviewed Charlie Kirk. And
Yeah.
I think he said he went to 40 different campuses. And
Yeah.
they did, and they had a focus that they went to the battleground states.
Right.
Pennsylvania was one of those.
Well, and if you go into Pennsylvania, they flipped, I'm trying to remember the name of the county. The county that Penn State resides in has been blue since the 70s or 80s. It flipped red this year. The College Town County. That's pretty wild, but I attribute that to places like Turning Point Action, but also Early Vote Action, which was specifically Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Chase folks. There was a huge concerted effort. That's one of the other factors, really. They had lawyers. They were ready to fight fraud in a way that we were not ready for in 2020. But this year, the Republican Party and surrounding groups mobilized a successful early voting campaign. And that was one of those movements where I thought this is a strategic versus idealistic battle in my mind. Ideally, I think there's election day for a reason. I don't like election season. I don't like early voting. I don't think we ought to have any of these things. But as many much moons years I've complained about this, and a lot of the right have, we have not successfully shut it down. And it is one of the primary machines that the left has used to shut us down on election day, because they can run up the tally and know what they need and see the results, knowing we'll probably win election day, but being able to look at their results as they go along through an early voting season. Republicans flipped that on the head this year, and the conservative movement turned that weapon against them. Now, that doesn't mean that we won the early vote in a bunch of states, but we used it so effectively, it really kind of eliminated some of the ability to cheat. By the way, one of the other factors is several states that have mail-in balloting did not this year, like they did in 2020, have universal mail-in balloting, where we just automatically send the ballot whether you request it or not. Pennsylvania did that in 2020. This year you had to request your ballot. Some of that stuff, which was COVID era, nuttiness, very much used on purpose. Hey, everyone, if there's a pandemic on, we can just send out ballots. It was convenient. That disappeared. I think that also is one of the factors that contributes.
Election integrity issues, many of the election integrity issues that we have to deal with. And I know that we all want to sit there and say, we need to deal with this in the state of Missouri, but as we have a friend called Dr. Frank talks about, we couldn't defeat it at the state level. We have to defeat it and control it at each county level, each area within our county. So we need to get a lot of people activated on what's going on with election integrity at the local level, like they're doing in St. Charles County and like we need to do here.
Yeah. It has to go to the local level, which is why I say you call your state rep and state senator for petition reform. But for everything else, that included, show up at your county committee more often, even if you're not a member. Just show up and start putting pressure on them, because it really does have to be done at a local level, which, this is what we saw here. So much intense energy was focused on Arizona and Pennsylvania that they knew if we can flip these two states, this changes the entire makeup of the electoral map for the presidential election. It did. Pennsylvania was technically the winning call that put Trump over 270 electoral votes. Arizona was a big part of that as well, but guess what? Some changes in Georgia on the electoral level. They weren't as many as I'd like, but I have to admit that there were electoral changes made that secured the election in a decent way. Even though I think Brad Raffensperger is a terrible Republican and still needs to be replaced by someone better, to their credit, they did well. And Arizona did a few things that mattered. It was enough, and it was only 3 states that got incredibly heated, concentrated control. What'd you hear about all year? Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. In our case, what'd you hear about? Not Missouri statewide. We talked about this county, this county, this county, this. That is how political elections are won, is at the next level, all the way down to the granular stuff at your precinct. Which is why Phyllis Schlafly, who I am so grateful to have worked with personally and still serve her organizations, one of our most famous brochures that still gets requested is titled The Most Important Office in America. And it is not the president, it's not the Oval Office, it's the precinct captain. And that was her argument, was from the bottom up. You must get a hold of that. So don't you worry about your state or even your county. Worry about your precinct. Become the captain, find the captain, and then go to the next layer up, and then the next layer up, and you get this little army that builds a little more each time. It really is all about that. And I think that as we're seeing results up here, we realize that same strategy goes into play. We won the presidential election on the early vote side of it, not by going to every state, but by going to 3. Or really 4. I'll throw North Carolina in. And they locked it in. There's a way through each of these systems, and it was successfully navigated at the Electoral College. We need to start successfully navigating that, to your point, in our own home states. But also, I'd like to do that at the congressional level, which there's my reference to initiative petition reform, so that we can have some more checks. Any other questions? Because I could go on and on, but it's, these are a few of the key things I've seen, and a few of the, I think, important things to talk about. Some of the implications of what we're looking at and why.
I might just make a comment of something I heard. I think it was James Dobson's his new program. I'm not sure what it's called. Family Life. It's not Family Life, but whatever he currently does now. But he read a lady's email. So I think when you're talking about the number of millions of numbers missing previous. I might have this statistic wrong, and I'll make a comment about the email. What didn't they say last night or so that was how the Democrats outfunded, like, was it $4 million? There might have been a bigger number than that. So I want to credit God. There are so many variables that you look at things like how did we get to where we are now with this win with Trump? It was, having more judges at the polling places and integrity and all that, but it definitely, God does move people in places he wants them to be. But
Absolutely.
this lady said in her email, which I think we should think about going forward, she said, we're not in junior high anymore. Why are we wanting to have all these pet things about personalities, bickering? And he listed in that email things she said, and they're just very simple things. And sometimes we get so long-winded, like, do I want more of a military? Pro-God, pro-family, pro-Israel. I mean, she went through the basic values that most Americans or people in other countries would want for their well-being. And that, to me, I felt like and I heard through the television reports and things that the thing that they felt like clinched it for the most part was two things. It was the economy and the border that most people were able to relate to because they impacted each other.
I was looking at the AP Votecast, and you want to look at some interesting factors, not about age, but about numbers here. If you want to talk about issues as they relate to every voting population, compared to 2020, this is more important than 2020 on this side of the vertical line, less important than 2020 on this side. Racism is the only thing that made it to the less important side. Otherwise, you see healthcare, economy, climate, everything got more important, but economy and immigration are the two biggies. Something that everyone is looking at and seeing the destruction of the country. It superseded almost everything in their minds, which that was, the biggest divide. Do you want the people who have opened the door and tried to take it off its hinges, or do you want the people who are saying, let's close it and be reasonable? And then the same thing on inflation and the economy. There was a serious strategy put to it here, and then I'll go ahead and close it up. If you have any more questions, I am happy to answer them when I'm done and talk.
And the churches, we tried to get churches to even put up signs about it.
Right.
We talked to the pastors. Most didn't say anything from church. About
Yeah, there was a lot missing on that. There's another casualty in America that needs to be fixed on its own individual level. Is we need the church to become the church again, and that spiritual awakening will not come at the ballot box. You can tell it feels like the battle box this year. Let me end with this and say I am encouraged by some of these trends. I'm disappointed with some of the results. I'm encouraged by a lot of the trends, because what we're seeing is Gen Xers this year, as parents, voted very differently than they ever have before. And out of the young people, 27 and below, which is all of you up here in the front rows and a few farther back, the majority is still not necessarily in line with conservative values, but it's growing, and the ones who are conservative are shifting so far to the right compared to my generation and up, the millennials and up. And I think that this is the understanding that we need not just more conservatism, we need traditionalism. I don't want to just conserve something that exists right now. I want foundational principles in America, traditional principles in America. I want the Christian foundation of Western civilization to be upheld. I don't just want to conserve the way it was. Well, when? It's too many explanations. I want traditional values. I want to be not a fundamentalist, a foundationalist. And I think that is really starting to take a hold of Gen Z and below. And I think that's really exciting. But to me, what that says is, in the meantime, I will never abandon my convictions and my ideology. But I think for all of us in the meantime who are voting right now, looking at the next set of elections, Senate in 2026, the next Republican election 2028, 2032 with that map, hopefully, that we talked about a minute ago. Right now, I have to look and say, I am excited about this, but I don't consider Tuesday a victory. It's an opportunity, because it can't be the victory. No, it has just started. Now we're being handed an opportunity, and what that means is I want the Trump administration, I want my next Missouri legislature to be ruthless with policy. Because all too often what happens is they use our niceness and kindness against us, and we extend a hand of bipartisanship and good assumptions, and on the other side is a Marxist who doesn't care. I'm tired of that. I want the Trump administration to come in and clean house, burn out the rot, fire everyone, shut down, throw people in jail who ought to be in jail, and just fire others who ought not to be there. We need to do the same thing in Missouri. I don't want there to be bipartisanship amongst our senators over deals that don't get us anywhere. I would like our senators to say, no, this is how it's going to be. And I'm going to go and get enough people to do it with me. Our niceness is our biggest downfall. I am looking for ruthlessness, which means, on policy, which means we absolutely have to take this not as a victory, but as the beginning, as an opportunity. We just finished one section, but the next one has already begun. So this week is a little bit of a breather, but it starts in earnest now because the Trump transition team is moving. Missouri's legislature, they already met yesterday. So these things are starting to get in motion. So it's now, I hope you've taken your deep breath because that needs to be over and we need to be moving on to the next thing. So that's what my pick apart is. I'll come and talk to you when we're done. But that's what my pick apart is. We need ruthlessness on behalf of the principles that matter and fighting for those inside the system. Because if we don't have that, it's over. So that's my take on 2024 as we have it so far.